Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Shane Beamer. The South Carolina Gamecocks really starting to get things going in the transfer portal over the last couple of days. And this is kind of what we talked about, right? That first week for South Carolina in the transfer portal window, it was primarily South Carolina making sure the best players on our roster in 2024 are going to be back in 2025, kind of taking care about what's in house before we start bringing in new players. They did a really good job of that. And now we're starting to see that shift between, all right, we're good with the guys we have on our roster from 2024. Let's go make some additions that make us better in 2025. And the thing that stands out to me first is it's very intentful. Like, we're not just going out and getting random players. We're looking at our roster, we're looking at our depth chart and saying, where do we need to inject immediate talent into this team heading into 2025? And you're going out and getting those players. We talked about Jordan Dingle yesterday, a guy that, look, that commitment's not going to make national media headlines, but you kind of wanted an inline blocker. A tight end that South Carolina likes to run a lot of 12 personnel. They want to run the football. You go out and land a guy that might not necessarily be the most prolific pass catcher at the tight end spot, which is okay because you got a guy like Michael Smith. Let's go get a veteran that has done it for a long time in the SEC that can get it done in the blocking department. Go and grab a guy like Jordan Dingle. And now you talk about late yesterday afternoon and night, Andrew Jones, Gabriel Brownlow-Dindy, two players I want to get into at two positions that South Carolina wanted to make sure they were going to address heading into 2025. Fired up to get into it. Before we do, and as always, to the South Carolina fans, the amount of support y'all showing the boys has been absolutely amazing. Whether it's kind of talking about the back half of 2024, whether it's talking about the transfer portal, can't thank you guys enough for rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Without further ado, let's get into this one. Let's start with off-ball linebacker Andrew Jones. Now, to have this discussion, I do want to throw this one out really quick. So in the courts yesterday, they ruled that if you played JUCO, it did not count against your eligibility. And we saw Diego Pavia, the Vanderbilt quarterback, be able to return to Vanderbilt in 2025 because of that ruling. You look at Bam Martin-Scott, that's a guy that could be affected by that decision as well. Bam Martin-Scott, the off-ball linebacker position was, I don't know if I go as far in saying it was a concern, but it certainly was a question mark for South Carolina heading into the 2025 year. You're losing a lot of veteran production from that room. If you're able to hang on to Bam Martin-Scott, and now you add a guy like Andrew Jones, you're all of a sudden looking at that linebacker position saying, well, we feel pretty damn good about what we have in linebacker going into 2025. So just kind of want to throw that out there in terms of if you're a South Carolina fan monitoring the Bam Martin-Scott situation. I want to get into Andrew Jones. Andrew Jones, from what it sounded like to me, was about as coveted as an off-ball linebacker as you saw in the transfer portal. A ton of offers from a ton of Power 4 programs. This was a guy that was a 4-star prospect coming out of high school, goes to Memphis, doesn't get on the football field early, transfers down to Grambling State, and plays really, really good in 2024. I mean, this is one of the most productive linebackers that you see in the country. 122 total tackles to go along with 20 tackles for a loss. What does that tell us right off the bat with Andrew Jones? One, he finds the ball carrier, which is project number one as an off-ball linebacker. Can you sift through traffic and go find the ball carrier and bring the ball carrier to the ground? 122 tackles. That tells us what we need to know about Andrew Jones. And I think 20 tackles for a loss is, hey, we're firing downhill. We're attacking the line of scrimmage at that linebacker position. Tackles at the linebacker position can look different in a lot of different ways. Are you making your tackles 4 or 5 yards down the field? Or you're making your tackles at the line of scrimmage? 20 tackles for loss, 34 run stops. That kind of tells you, Andrew Jones is one of those linebackers that is getting downhill, and he's making his plays out or behind the line of scrimmage, which is a massive storyline for me because you look at South Carolina and the recipe they want to have on defense. It's win on first and second down, stopping the run, create some negative plays, put these opposing offenses into some of those third and long situations. And then you got a guy like Dylan Stewart coming off the edge. That's the recipe. And I think Andrew Jones is a linebacker that can certainly allow you to operate like the defense we saw in 2024. Again, my biggest takeaway here is that we're going to lose a guy like Debo Williams, Demetrius Knight, potentially Bam Martin Scott. Most of our production in that linebacker room is moving on to the next level of their career. You look at Andrew Jones and say he's a guy that has played a lot of football, has been extremely productive. Insert him at a position that we have some question marks about. Now, I think another storyline here is Gabriel Brownlow-Dindy. This one might be the most exciting commitment that we see from South Carolina in terms of what can you get out of this kid. I remember covering him when he was coming out of high school in Lakeland, Florida. Every physical trait that you want in a defensive lineman, this kid has. He was a state champ in both discus and shot put. He was a phenomenal athlete off the line of scrimmage, legitimate, shocking power in his hands. This kid was a bona fide 5-star prospect. That is why he was a top 15 kid nationally coming out of high school. The injuries, a little bit of lack of consistency has kind of been the storyline. Mostly the injuries, if we're being honest. Suffered, I believe, a really bad back injury that kind of stunted his development. The story here is, one, you got to replace a lot of big dogs on the middle of that defensive line. I think number two is, what kind of version do you get Gabriel Brownlow-Dindy in 2025? If you can get him fully healthy and maximizing his traits, this kid could be a game wrecker for South Carolina. And although he's only played 82 career snaps in his first 3 years at Texas A&M, I look at him and say, this is still the sport of football. This is still a sport of height, weight, speed, especially on the defensive line. If you can get guys that are bigger, stronger, faster, chances are you're going to have a pretty good defensive line. Go bet on this kid, and let's see if he can get healthy. And so I think this is a really intriguing storyline to watch. And I think what you're watching for is he attending all the spring practices? Is he out on the football field? Is he healthy? And that's probably what you're looking for, because if this guy's healthy, like, there's a real chance you're getting a really good football player in 2025 at a position that you're kind of replacing a lot of good players at. I think this is a really exciting one. You go back to his Oklahoma State game and the bowl game in 2023, you saw the flashes, and then again struggled with injuries in 2024. So there's been glimpses of this kid kind of putting it together. We'll see if he can do that for South Carolina in 2025, because if he does, really, really big addition for South Carolina. And the last guy I want to talk about right now is Kendrick Law, who's going to be visiting South Carolina this weekend. Not necessarily the kind of wide receiver we're looking for. I think a lot of South Carolina fans are looking for some of those bigger bodied wide receivers, but you have a guy, Nick Harbor, in it. It's kind of funny, and I saw a South Carolina fan put this in the comments section the other day, and I kind of agree with it. We're talking about upgrading the wide receiver room, finding a wide receiver one. One of y'all put in the comments section, we might have our wide receiver one on campus in Nick Harbor. And I think you're absolutely right. I mean, you go back towards the back half of 2024, you saw the light bulb start to flicker and start to turn on. Does it fully turn on in 2025? Do we get the best version of Nick Harbor that we've seen throughout his college football career? Because if you do, Nick Harbor is going to be a freaky dude, and certainly could be that wide receiver one that's a big body that can work vertically down the field, kind of complement what Lenore Sellers can do pushing the ball down the field. You also have a true freshman, Mazeo Bennett, who I think is going to be a bona fide stud for the next couple of years. And so I look at South Carolina and say, you feel decent about what you have in your pass catch room, but you still probably want to add more. You look at Kendrick Law, a guy that, again, kind of like Gabriel Brownlow-Dindy, hasn't dealt with the injuries Brownlow-Dindy has, but really good football player coming out of high school that you weren't really sure what he was going to play. He's electric with the football in his hands. He's a guy that has incredible weight room numbers out of Alabama, and this kid is put together. He kind of built like a running back, right? 5'11", 210 pounds. There's been times in his career where I look at him and say, I wouldn't even mind if he just played running back. I think he could do that. But when you get the football in his hands, with how fast he is, former sub-11 guy in the 100-meter dash, with how physical he is, this could be a really big weapon. And we talk about surrounding Lenore Sellers with the pieces for him to be successful. Kendrick Law could be that guy. Again, it's a little bit of a projection because you haven't seen him fully put it together at Alabama, kind of similar to Gabriel Brownlow-Dindy. We're betting on good athletes and trying to make good athletes good football players. And if you can do that with guys like Kendrick Law and Gabriel Brownlow-Dindy, there's a good chance you got some really good gets in the transfer portal. We'll see how it plays out. Again, we'll continue to update the commitments as they come in. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Appreciate you guys, and we'll talk to y'all later.